All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the BGSU Science Cafe. I'm Kevin McClooney. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Biological Sciences and the Center for Great Lakes and Watershed Studies. I'll be your host for this evening. We have a great event tonight, but first I want to thank the Division of Research and Economic Engagement, Marketing and Brand Strategy, and WBGU for helping to make tonight possible, as well as our graduate coordinator, Kelly Bryant. Our event tonight is modeled after the International Science Cafe movement, encouraging informal conversations between scientists and the public. Thus, the talk will be short and aimed at a general audience with about 30 minutes devoted to discussion with the speaker. Our main presenter tonight is Jonathan Kershaw, an assistant professor in the College of Health and Human Services at BGSU. Dr. Kershaw holds a bachelor's degree from Brigham Young and a PhD from Purdue. Tonight, Dr. Kershaw will be speaking with you about his research about consumer acceptance of sustainable foods. Please join me in welcoming him.
Great. Kevin, is that my cue? All right. Thanks so much, Dr. McClooney, for that introduction and for the invitation to be here tonight. I'm excited to share some of the work that I've been doing along with several talented colleagues, two of which will be joining me for the question and answer later, Dr. Faye Weistein and Savannah Lim. So my talk tonight is about consumer acceptance of sustainable food systems. So I want to start breaking this down a little bit. When I talk about consumer acceptance, I'm talking about food choice. So I'll try to be a little interactive here tonight. I'll do two polls. This is the first one here. I invite you to think about the last food you purchased. Perhaps it was at a grocery store, perhaps it was at a restaurant, especially if you were trying to decide between two or more items. And think about ultimately the food that you chose to buy. What were some of the main reasons that you did that? So I have a poll everywhere here. You can, the link is there. You can also scan the QR code. And you can vote for two or three of these. What are the top reasons why you chose the food that you did? So it was healthy. Was it because of the taste? Was it because it was convenient? It was easy to prepare? Was it because it was the more affordable option of the two? Or was it just the routine is what you're familiar with? Perhaps it was something that you grew up eating, you've eaten for a long time. Or was it because it was good for the environment? So we'll give it probably about another half a minute here to respond to this poll and help me get to know you a little bit and get to know some general motives around your food choices there. All right, let's see if it tastes good. All right, looks like the poll is working, so this is good. Vote for two or three here. You just hit the upvote button, and we'll see where this goes. Things stop moving around. All right, you can enter your own choices here, but for the sake of our data collection, let's just upvote or downvote the ones that were there. Some people trying to combine 2 for 1. But remember, you can upvote or downvote 2 to 3 here. All right, this might give us a good representation here. So not surprising, at least to me, the top reason that people said was important was because it tasted good. Affordability, and also the familiarity as well. So this is, I bring this up to recognizing that food choice is complex. And even there's many reasons beyond these that people choose the foods they do. There's cultural significance of foods. It's what's available. Is the food that you want to eat, is it accessible to you? And your choice for the last food you bought may be in a very different situation than when it was last week, or if you're with friends, or if you're alone, or depending on the time of day. And so one thing I want to emphasize is that food choices are complex. And however, while recognizing this complexity, as was with you all, our audience is pretty consistent with most people. So this is data from the Food Information Council. They've been doing this poll for several years, and consistently, taste is the criteria that is most often cited as important, as very important or important. So that's what this figure is showing here, is that among all these factors, taste is the most important. Now you may notice at the bottom line here, environmental sustainability, which is the direction that I'll be taking my talk today about when we're thinking about food choice, that many people are often unwilling to sacrifice taste for environmental sustainability. And so a question that I invite you to think about tonight during the presentation, during a question and answer is, can I really save the planet or do what's most environmentally sustainable through the food choices I eat, through the foods that I eat? And if so, would you be willing to sacrifice taste? Would you be willing to pay a little bit more or to be inconvenienced for that? And so, as I mentioned, food choices are complex, but taste is an essential characteristic for most people when thinking about the foods that they want to eat. And so where I'll be taking the presentation today is putting this in context of sustainable choices in context of other reasons that people choose to eat the foods they do. Because at the end of the day, most people are unwilling to sacrifice taste for the other factors. And there's a decent gap between the intention to consume sustainable food and what people actually choose to purchase. The people that say they consider the environment in their purchasing decisions, not just food, but other things as well. Some polls put it between 60 and 75%. But when you look at how it actually changes purchase behavior, it's much lower, closer to a third. And so what are some reasons why there may be this gap? And what are some ways that we can bridge this gap? I'll be discussing two reasons among many tonight some reasons why there's this gap between wanting to eat sustainably and actually doing so. So we'll go back to this poll again. I'm gonna try if we can make a word cloud here. So you can also text this one or bring back up the window. Actually, I need to activate that other poll. So I'm gonna do that really quick. All right, we are going to try to make a word cloud. So when you think, I need to eat a sustainable food, what does that mean to you? What are some key words or phrases when you think about eating sustainably? All right, we'll see if this one will work too. We had good luck with the first one. All right, so how a word cloud works is that the more the word is mentioned, the bigger the word becomes. So a lot of mentions of the environment here. We'll give it another minute, see if we get some phrases that show up more than once. So low impact, equity, great. The limitation of the word cloud is if you spell something slightly differently, then it ends up as two different words. So environmentally and environmental are both on here. All right. We'll go ahead and move on with our presentation here. So it's interesting, one of the biggest ones that showed up is environmentally friendly. If we were in a classroom and we could continue this discussion live a little bit more, I would probe a little bit more about what does it mean to be environmentally friendly. It's a great concept. Are we talking about greenhouse gas emissions? Are we talking about water pollution? Are we talking about biodiversity, or how many different kinds of plants and animals are able to also cohabitate during the food production environment? So let's, okay. I think I have to hit escape here. All right, if I can go through this last hoop, I think I will have succeeded at managing technology today. We get it? Oh. I hit escape on the wrong thing. All right, we're back. No more switching, that was it. All right, so this was another word cloud from that I found online. So low environmental impact was also some of the things that you all said. Economically viable. Sometimes sustainable is broken down into a few categories. It's sustainable for people, for the planet, and also it needs to be economically sustainable as well, as in the business activity is able to be sustained over time. So this is one of the barriers, I think, that I'll be addressing tonight about what does it mean to really have a sustainable food. And if you aren't quite sure how to define a sustainable food, you're not alone. About 2/3 of people either agree or somewhat agree that it's hard for consumers to know whether the foods they're eating are environmentally sustainable. And a number even higher than that say that if they had a better idea of what was sustainable, it would influence their purchasing decisions. And so I'll break down a fairly simple definition the way I look at it. It's simply environmentally sustainable food production is that we are able to produce more food with fewer resources, such as fuel and land and water, and also generate less waste while doing that. Now, there are a lot of different ways to quantify sustainability. Often you hear phrases like carbon footprint or how much greenhouse gas emissions does it take. So sustainability is a very complex topic, and it's oversimplistic to reduce it to one simple measure. So I'll avoid doing too many different kinds of global metrics because they can be misleading at times. But just to give an idea of the impact of our global food production on the planet, there's a few metrics here. So about a fourth, by some estimates, of all greenhouse gas emissions come from food production. About half of the habitable land on the planet is used for agriculture. And if you think about fresh water use, it's almost 3/4, 70% of fresh water use goes to agriculture. And eutrophication, that's a fancy word for saying that water pollution or runoff of the nutrients, there's too many nutrients that then get in the water that can cause all kinds of issues that Dr. McClooney could talk quite a bit about, I'm sure. And then biodiversity refers to the number of different species of plants and animals. So the other barrier that I'd like to address tonight is concerns. And this can, I'm grouping in a few different areas, topics with this challenge here. And one is that often sustainable food systems or production methods are unfamiliar to people. And if the food is unfamiliar, there are questions. Is it just as safe as the alternative methods? And importantly, for today's presentation anyway, are they still tasty? Will there be a trade-off here? If I have to choose sustainably, am I going to have to give something up? And because there's this unknown, there's a higher risk on the part of the consumer. Are you willing to risk the taste or the money that you spend on that food in order to be more sustainable? So where I'd like to go tonight then is addressing some strategies to address these specific challenges. Now, keeping in mind that there are many, again, food choice is complex, sustainability is complex, so talking about them both together is going to be a very long conversation. But some themes I'd like to talk about are how messaging can address the confusion around sustainability, the awareness of what is or is not sustainable, and also how proper messaging can change the way the food is actually perceived. Food is much more, our taste experience is much more than how the food interacts with our taste buds in our mouth, but it's a product of what we expect, which can be influenced by what we perceive as how it's produced and other attributes that we really can't quantify, but it's really in our mind based on our expectations. All right, so I'll be discussing three different examples that I've been working on along with my colleagues about different sustainable food production systems. So the first one is aquaponics. So this is work done in collaboration with Dr. Kevin Neves, Dr. Faye Weinstein, who's joining us this evening, Dr. Jeff Meyer, and Brittany Kralik, a former graduate student here at BGSU. And so aquaponics is when fish and vegetables are grown in the same water circulating system. The byproducts of the fish are used as natural fertilizer for the plants. The plants then act as a natural filter, and then the water can be circulated back to the plants. And so this is an alternative to existing fish production methods. So there are wild-caught methods, which are where they're caught through nets or reel and rod. And some, if not done sustainably, though, it can result in overfishing. And in fact, large majority of the world's fisheries are already being fished at or over capacity. Fish farming is another common method, often open in net pens in the ocean. However, there are also concerns there about possible damaging of the habitats there with the fish. And again, Kevin Neves will go into much more detail with that. But the point that I'd like to make is that by using the same water circulating system, there's a reduction in waste. There's a high efficiency, Again, because more food with the same resources, because both plants and fish can be produced, and in the system we have here, there's a third species of freshwater shrimp as well. It also results in lower land use, and it avoids the overfishing and habitat destruction that can result from other fishing methods. However, there are some challenges with aquaculture, with aquaponics. It is a largely unfamiliar method, and so as one of the points I brought up earlier, there are potential concerns with methods that are unfamiliar. And so the question that we wanted to explore was, will this be perceived as similarly as farmed fish, or due to the unique environmental benefits, could there be a premium? Could we add some sort of advantage in the minds of consumers? Generally speaking, farmed fish are perceived as lower in quality. They're perceived as less tasty and less nutritious. So could that potentially sink the appeal of aquaponics? Because people that buy fish, again, similar theme that I'll be coming back to, is that product quality is most important, and the flavor and taste and nutritional benefits. That's what people are looking for primarily when they are buying fish. However, there are some opportunities with aquaponics. One is that consumers are increasingly interested in natural and chemical-free and sustainability, and aquaponics delivers on many of these benefits. So this is a brief diagram of our system that Kevin Nez set up. This is in the greenhouse here at Bowling Green State University. And we have 3 species, 2 tanks of the yellow perch and then the crayfish. Then the water is then circulated to what we grew were tomatoes in the raceway. And so the inputs to this system are a little bit of energy to keep the water temperature and keep the pump moving, and the fish food. Other than that, these 3 species can grow. Just to help you become a little more familiar, show and tell here. Here's the system before the tomatoes were in it, the perch, and then the tomatoes. They grow quite prolifically and help remove the nitrogen from the water, and brief show and tell there. And so what we wanted to answer is, first of all, is there an actual difference in taste and quality if you're raising fish in this system versus other methods? And we did some chemical analyses, didn't find huge differences. We also did some taste tests. And participants, there was no significant difference in how much they liked the wild-caught fish versus the aquaponic fish. And so this, again, checks the box for that we're not compromising on taste here. But again, the food acceptance is in context of so many other factors. And these fish were tasted without information, and which is rarely, if ever, the case when we eat food. We tend to know where our food is coming from, at least what the information on the packaging. And so Dr. Meyer and Dr. Weinstein, together, we designed this consumer acceptance experiment as well. So this was an online survey. And imagine that you are going to the grocery store to buy some fish. And you see this description of an aquaponic perch. And so I won't read this whole scenario to you, but people were presented with different levels of information. Some people only said this was harvested using aquaponics or wild-caught or farmed fish. And then others had a paragraph describing the environmental benefits or the environmental impact of these different methods. And so what we wanted to answer was just having more information about how the fish were caught and the environmental conditions. Can that improve the acceptance of the wild-caught fish? So as we hypothesized that without information, aquaponics fish were seen comparable to farmed fish, and wild-caught was by far perceived as the tastiest, the most healthy, and also had the highest purchase intention. However, when we were just looking at the presence of information, then aquaponic fish were the most popular. They were perceived as tastier and healthier and a higher purchase intention. And what was interesting is that it was because of how the information about the environmental conditions influenced the perceived tastiness and healthiness. So in other words, there was what's often called a halo effect, where an unrelated attribute affects something else, how the product is perceived. So when they were perceived as environmentally friendly, they were also seen as healthier and more tasty. Okay, I'll move on to the next project here. This was in collaboration with Savannah Lim, and this is about plant-based protein. So this is this is an area which is much more well known than aquaponics or the other project I'll be discussing tonight. But this idea that protein from plant sources have a lower environmental impact than animal protein. So again, there's a few things I'd like to point out with this figure here. So this is looking at per the serving of this food, what are the greenhouse gas emissions? So before we read too much into this figure, I'd like to remind you that there are a lot of different ways to measure sustainability. Greenhouse gas emissions is just one of them. And also, what I did not mention before is that there's a lot of differences. It depends a lot on where it's grown. So for example, we point out here that it says a chocolate bar, if accounting for deforestation, if it was produced in an unsustainable way, can actually have a bigger footprint than beef that was produced in an environmentally sustainable way. So while food category does influence the environmental impact, it can, within that food, there's a lot of variability and depending on how it was produced. So it's not quite as simple as just simply targeting food groups when thinking about what is a more environmentally sustainable food. However, in general, plant proteins do have a lower environmental impact than something like beef, for example. So when thinking about encouraging the adoption of plant-based diets or eating more plant-based protein, one of the many barriers is the taste. People say, again, about 2/3 of people would respond that if plant-based foods tasted better, then they would be more likely to eat and to buy plant-based foods. Also, the lack of familiarity. Many people have not tried replacing meat with plant-based foods, for example, and so getting that behavior change can be a challenge. And so together with Savannah, we explored a question of, well, can messaging influence how much the protein source, animal versus plant, that people are choosing? And so we designed an 8-week text message intervention. There were 2 groups. One group received health-focused messages. The other received environment-focused messages. And this was to explore what is the best way, the best strategy if one is more effective than the other. And we recorded what they ate at the beginning of their, before they had the messages, and then following the 8 weeks, again, had them record what they ate. And so the messages were comparable between the 2 groups, but switching out a few keywords to have them either health-focused or environment-focused. We also looked at not just the message, but we looked at if there were certain attributes about the people, such as if they value the environment or not, or if they value health, and if that could help predict what people chose to eat. So we saw not huge differences between the 2 groups, but among both groups, generally we saw that intention to consume proteins from animal sources, such as meat, went down following the text message intervention. And interestingly, they were, when looking at pictures of foods from animal sources, they were rated as less tasty, whereas pictures of foods from plant-based sources were rated, and just plant-based diets in general, were rated as more tasty following the text message intervention. And however, the actual food intake did not change in either group. So messages can be, text messages, for example, can be an important part of influencing people's behavior, but again, food choice is complex and it require multiple efforts beyond receiving a couple of text messages a week. One small difference that we did see between the 2 groups is that people that received the environmental text messages, they were more likely to value the environment more following the text message, after receiving the text messages. And so that suggests that there was a lack of awareness or education around the environmental impact of protein production that could be an opportunity for education. All right. Caught up here. All right, the final example that I wanted to discuss today is Perennial Agriculture. So again, this is in collaboration with Dr. Fay Weisstein and Dr. Jeff Meyer. And so Perennial Agriculture is the idea that plants grow back every year. We see perennial flowers. Some of them are starting to poke their heads up through the now melted snow, where most crops that we consume, wheat, rice, corn, they're planted every year. When they're planted every year, that means the fields need to be plowed every year. And however, Kernza, or intermediate wheatgrass, has the advantage of being a perennial crop. It allows it to develop a deep root system. As a result of these deep roots, again, I have a picture here just to this is the classic Kernza. If you were to do a Google image search for Kernza, this would more than likely pop up. You can just visually see this huge difference in the root mass. So this helps keep soil in place. It improves the health of the soil. More nutrients and more of the microbiome of the soil stays in place. Helps reduce erosion as well. Having that huge mass of roots helps reduce water pollution as well. There's less leaching of the pollution to the water sources. It also helps, it's actually carbon negative, as in it reverses greenhouse gas emissions, because that carbon that's in the atmosphere ends up going back into the soil where much of it came from in the first place. And so we've just started to collect data on this and in the process of collecting some more. But really the questions that we're exploring in this is that who receives the message matters. As I mentioned, environmental sustainability is not a high priority for many people. And so if we frame the message saying it's better for you versus is it better for the environment, does that change people's response, how much they're willing to pay for a box of pasta, for example, made from Kernza flour? Again, so we have some specific messaging that is either looking at how it could be better for you or the same message, but then put in the frame that, oh, this is better for the environment. And not only does it matter who is the values and the background of the person considering the product, but the product that you're considering as well. Does it matter, would the message have the same effect if you were trying to sell brownies versus trying to sell granola? An example that I like to give is that low-fat ice cream. If you're going out to buy ice cream, you want it to taste good. That's the job, that's the role of the ice cream. And so how are these environmental messages impacting people, how they view the product, depending on if the purpose of getting this product is for a nice indulgent treat, or if it's seen as more of a useful, healthy product. So I'll wrap up now with some key themes from these different projects and the background that I gave, and then a few more minutes and we'll open it up to questions. So the environmental impact of food does matter, and increasingly more and more people are aware of and interested in understanding the impact of their choices. However, taste and other factors such as health and convenience, affordability, often matter more to people. Another takeaway is that information about the product, it changes not just, information about the environmental sustainability of the product, influences not just what we think about the environmental impact, but it also has this halo effect on how we perceive the taste, the healthiness of the product as well. And that ultimately targeted messages are going to be more impactful, the right message for the right product for the right people. So, can you save the planet by eating healthier? And if so, will it come at a sacrifice? Will it come at a cost? Well, fortunately, it doesn't always have to come at sacrificing taste. There are many other strategies and recommendations that I'd like to leave you with today thinking about this question. I invite you to think about what matters most to you with the food that you choose to eat. Often it is taste. So it goes without saying that if we can make sustainable products more tasty, then they'll be more successful. And I'd also like to point out that as I mentioned, it's not only about not eating meat or only eating certain foods or not, but it's understanding how these foods were produced. And so if eating a vegan lifestyle is not sustainable for you, as in it's not something that you could do for a long period of time, there are other ways that you could think about reducing the environmental impact of the foods that you choose to eat. And so there's lots of room at the table for different strategies. Food is just one of other many environmental impacts for the way that we live our lives. And so if you're looking to reduce your environmental impact, you can consider a variety of non-food strategies as well. Also, incremental changes. So again, a vast diet overhaul is not doable. It's not for most people's lifestyles, but there may be small changes to portion sizes or frequency of eating certain items. You can still enjoy the foods that you love, but not have to make drastic changes. And becoming informed about the impact of the foods or the brands or the companies that you buy from can also be one way to understand more the environmental impact of the foods that you're eating. More and more companies are being transparent about the impact because people want to know how their food is impacting the environment. And that's all I have. Looks like I ended right at 7 o'clock, so happy to take discussion questions and welcome Faye Weinstein and Savannah Lim to the discussion. Back to you, Kevin, unless you...
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah.
That was really, really great, really interesting. And yeah, perfectly timed, right at 7.
It was lucky.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, next we're going to have a question and answer and discussion session. If you would like to ask a question, please type your question in a private chat to me and I will ask the question for you. Or you can raise your virtual hand in Zoom and I can unmute you and you can ask your question yourself. But first, Jonathan, I know you mentioned their names, but can you introduce your panelists?
Sure.
A little bit more
So Dr. Faye Weinstein is an associate professor in the College of Business and Department of Marketing. And Savannah Lim is a recent BGSU alum, graduated in December with her Master's of Food and Nutrition. She's also a registered dietitian.
Awesome. So I'm gonna lead us off while we wait for some people to type in their questions. I'm gonna lead us off with my traditional first question. So, and this can be for all panelists, but what got you interested in studying nutrition and how about sustainable foods in particular?
Yeah, I'll let the panelists take that. I've been doing a lot of talking, so I'll hear from someone else for a minute, then I'll
yeah, go ahead, Faye.
Yes, my background is in marketing and studying about consumer behavior and how they perceive different messages. Particularly, my recent year of the research is focusing on eco-friendly products consumption. I just never studied food before until I have an opportunity that Jonathan and Kevin approached me for a federal research grant, and it's studying about the aquaponics and linked to how consumer acceptance of a brand new eco-friendly product on the market. So we hook up there, and then we figure that is actually a lot of the opportunity for cross-discipline research. And for the study that he presented, for marketing side, we bring in a lot of the messaging effect, how the consumer perception on those. It opens my new area of learning about taste, how the consumer actually perceive taste differences. Even the small changes in the messaging can actually have a huge effect, and I found it very intriguing.
Very cool, thank you. Yeah, that's a great answer. When you have these interdisciplinary collaborations, it's really fun to see how those form. So that was cool. Savannah, what do you think?
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so for me, eating healthier is always been my goal, just my personal goal and my professional goal. And by now we've known that plant-based diet, plant-based protein is healthier for health and environment. So I had a chance to work with Dr. Kershaw, explore messaging technique to influence actual intakes. So for me it's more like passing on the education and knowledge to the consumers, and hopefully they will make changes in their actual diet. So that's why I've take this opportunity to work with Dr. Kershaw and explore what's out there.
Right. And I'll just say, most of my research was originally looking at health messages. I was always interested in, the basics of nutrition advice has not really changed a whole lot for the past couple of decades. Moderation, variety, eat your fruits and vegetables. And so I was just really interested in this question. Well, if we generally know the basics of healthy eating, why is there this gap between what we know and what we do? And so, again, there's a lot of reasons that can influence food choice, and ultimately I went to the sensory side of things, one potential strategy to influence it. And as I got more into the field, and with the growing relevance and urgency of environmental sustainability, I saw an opportunity to understand more about how environmental sustainability, those types of messages and foods, can also influence people's choices. Cool.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? I had a later question, like, how do you get that action to occur? Like, you demonstrated that even when you did influence their sort of knowledge and even beliefs about things, they still didn't necessarily change what they were eating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to comment a little bit more on how do you get those behavioral changes?
Yeah, there's a lot of behavior change theories out there, and our intervention was more theory informed, and so people need to feel like they have the ability to change. People need to feel like they're supported in the change by the people that are important to them, and people need to have the attitudes and the knowledge towards that. So we did see some shifts in those in the values and what's called self-efficacy, or the belief that I can make this change. But again, food choice is complex, and there's a lot of factors that influence it, even within the person, right? I mean, think about how I started off today. Think about what you ate when you're with friends versus at lunch versus a late night snack. There's a lot of variability there, and sometimes there's, what do I have access to? What can I afford? So there's so big cop-out answer for the academics like is, well, it just depends so much, right? But there's a lot of factors that influence choice.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm sure I eat less healthy when I go to a party.
Yeah, and that's okay, right? I mean, that's why I really wanted to emphasize the strategy at the end. You don't have to go vegan to get health and environmental benefits. You don't have to drastically change things. You can make incremental changes and go into a party and eating a hamburger, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? But it's putting it in context and thinking about my overall diet. Are there places where I can make some changes? I mean, a lot of people have been doing health research for a long time, and dietitians will tell you it's not about good food, bad food. It's about this relationship with food.
I want to add a point on that, is that there's the gap between what the intention versus what their actual behavior is always exists. And to address on the point is, at least from a marketing perspective, a lot of the purchase, if you go to grocery shopping, and at that moment of your purchase is always very temporary, that it can be influenced by a lot of factors. For example, the packaging, the message on the packaging, the color, the package, and how is the message that the consumer are actually receiving, because they're comparing brands. And I would think to promote sustainable food consumption, we probably can start with, not from a long-term perspective. How do you, from now on, you're going to eat, very healthy or green food from now on? It's really at that moment of the shopping, at that moment when you're comparing non-healthy food versus healthy food, or among different healthy food. How is the marketing message at that point? It's going to change your immediate buying behavior. That will be a small step that we can take on, and then hopefully that once we collect enough information to learn about what type of the external factors can influence this immediate buying, then we can start to think about the long term, is how do you implement this strategy into more promoting of their consumption of the long term.
That's really interesting. I want to get to some questions in the chat, but just made me think about how now a lot of us are ordering our food online, from grocery stores ahead of time, rather than walking through the aisles. And I wonder how that's changing things. Now it's probably the search engine optimization, what shows up at the top, right? Or something like that is going to influence you, right? Anyway, yes. Let me get to some questions from the chat. So we've got one here. If I'm committed to eating sustainably, how can I convince my household to jump on board? I have switched to plant-based protein over the last year, and through trial and error, I found the best versions. As a result, my household loves them now. Otherwise, how do I move them along this path? Cook it and hope they come along for the ride?
That's a great question. I think that's really the theme of some of our research, is that you don't have to sell the sustainability benefit. You don't necessarily have to sell the health benefit. Find there's a phrase, meet people where they're at. If where they're at is, it has to taste good or I'm not coming along, then okay, then let's focus on the taste. If can we afford this food? Then okay, then maybe that's your way in with it. So just because it's the benefit that you want and that you think is most important, doesn't mean that's the benefit that they think is most important.
Yeah, I think that is, again, going back to the messaging, is that we see a lot of the sustainable food packaging out there in the market. They're really focusing on its environmental benefit. But that not necessarily is always effective, because there are always a group of people, they are not influenced by their consumption is going for is better for the environment. But we really need to find out is for an individual group is what really trigger you to consume more. That's our last project we're focusing on is should we frame it that is actually better for you as a person, focus on the health, or is better for the environment? Because of the different selling point, you can actually trigger their intention differently. Another long factor, at least in marketing for sustainable consumption, is one of the reasons they really hesitate in consume of the sustainable product is really they don't see the immediate effect. You tell them that what you're doing right now is really better for the environment, but they don't see the effect right away. But that is going back to the messaging again, is that we're really testing on what if you can actually convert what is the benefit now into a short-term frame that they can really digest. So every day, for example, how much of the amount of carbon footprint that you get to reduce, instead of telling them that in a year or in 10 years, this is how good for the environment. So the short-term versus the long-term benefit, we predict that would definitely have a huge impact on how the consumer are actually thinking about their current action of consumption of the sustainable food. And all the messaging is really going to have a different effect.
That's a good point. Yeah, if it's too removed, it's hard to see what you're doing, how it impacts things. And I guess some of us need that kind of immediate reward or feedback. I get it.
Yeah, especially something like food. I mean, food is such an immediate reward. It's something we can touch, we can experience, but environmental sustainability is kind of, well, harder to, it's less tangible.
Yeah. Savannah, did you want to add to that?
No, Dr. Kershaw and Dr. Fair have like made their points. I think they stole some of my points, so I'm like, okay. Yeah, well said.
We'll let you answer the next one first then.
Yeah, well, no, it's okay. But I think, was it Karen that asked the questions? Yeah, I thought her approach was really well done. So try and error. So it's really hard to sell like plant-based diet. So it's not always well received. So her approach is really well done. So that's what I would do too. So try and error, and what works for the family, go for it. And maybe if she has small kids, get them involved too in the cooking process, get them interested in the ingredients, so that works too. But otherwise, I think she's been doing well with her approach.
That's a great comment. So the next one was so you've talked about environmental sustainability as a message, health as a message. The next one is asking about like factory farms and animal suffering as a message. Have you looked into that at all?
Yes, we have. I've started exploring it some. What we found, this was actually a study I didn't talk about, but it was related, I did with an undergraduate student, looking at what are the different values of people that choose vegan meals at BGSU dining services versus people that don't. And difference in how they evaluate health was not significant. But I guess the summary is that the thing that was different was the value for animal welfare. So I think there's certainly potential there to explore messaging around animal welfare, and even more than environmental sustainability. I think more people can relate with animal welfare. You know, a lot of people have pets. They, how their attitude towards animals, and so maybe some removed greenhouse gas emissions somewhere else on the planet. Again, it's not as immediate. So long story short, I think there is potential there, and it's something in another project we're starting to look into.
Cool, very interesting. Other comments on that? No, okay. So the next one is more of a comment than a question, but it's a person whose daughter took a class with you, and apparently worked with this flour substitute that you're talking about, and they just want to make sure everybody knows that it's really good.
Okay, well, good.
And that they were convinced, and now they use it in their cooking.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, it's the interesting thing about Kernza is it's a relatively new. It's only become commercially available in really the past few years. Cascadian Farms recently released a cereal that's available, I believe, at Whole Foods. It might be at Kroger also, but there are relatively few companies that are selling retail Kernza products. It's because the volume is just not there yet. It was through traditional crossbreeding techniques, having this perennial grain, but relative to wheat, it is still, the yields are very low relative to wheat, and so there's still a lot of growth being done there, but working with plants and yearly cycles, it takes a while to get it just right.
That's interesting. Yeah. But we'll see how, maybe they can create some strains that are a little more productive.
Yeah, there's a lot of, most of the work being done on Kernza right now is on the agronomy side of things. Not a whole lot of people are looking at consumer acceptance yet, but really how can we grow enough of it, and what are some of the more functional properties of it as well?
Cool. Okay, we got another question here. Since plant proteins tend to be lower impact and usually less expensive for the consumer, would it be possible to have messaging related to saving money as an influencing factor?
Yeah, you know what? People, there's a perception that eating sustainably is more expensive, which, again, is perception, not always the reality. So I think that could be a sell. There's a wide spectrum of plant-based products. You have your can of beans on one end versus a Beyond Burger on the other. Both are made from plants, and the health of Beyond Burger and the environmental impact, I mean, that's something else, maybe a discussion for another day. But I think more of getting the protein from the plant source is more affordable, but you also have less familiarity, you have some more taste issues there, whereas the more processed, packaged, pre-prepared products do tend to be more expensive. So I guess it depends on where in that spectrum you're discussing, but I agree, I think that is important to a lot of people.
Not much is cheaper than a bag of dry beans and dry rice, right?
Yep, beans and rice.
Yeah.
Yes, I think focus on the price is one of the significant factor, at least for in the marketing side for sustainable product that is not food related, that there's a long study on the huge intention to behavioral gap. One of the main reasons that people hesitate in doing sustainable consumption is mainly because of the price. The product is much higher prices, and there's a study, it's not food related, but there's a study on how do you actually promote more people to using the energy saving light bulb, and then they focus on the price is going into the short term versus the long term frame. Is they have a study is on by every day how much money you get to save if you use the light bulb, but that has no effect because the amount was so small. They don't see the big saving. But if you actually combine into 365 days in 1 year, this is a big amount that you get to save. Actually, people are using more of the energy saving light bulb. I think the same concept can definitely be applied to the food products. Is you can really focus on the price, but then it really depends on how you actually frame the price. Is a bigger saving in 1 year, 10 years, or is a smaller saving per day? And I can see that will be a different effect in consumers' perception.
I will add one more comment, and again, Faye can probably talk about this a lot better than I can, but some people use price as a metric or as an indicator of quality as well. So in some cases, having a higher price actually leads to more purchases, because then people can feel like they're sacrificing more, they're to the cause. And so again, I may have not worded that literature correctly, but in some cases, having a higher price is more believable that it's impactful, and people can feel like they're investing more in the product.
Yes, I think the price is always an indicator about product quality. And oftentimes that for the recent experiment that we're doing on, we always have a question is on, given the benefit of this sustainable food is we give them an average market price and we ask them what is their willingness to pay. And we found that once you frame the message correctly, that the consumer do understand about the benefit, they actually are willing to pay slightly higher prices than the average, the market price. So I think it going back it depends on your target market group. If your target market group is to the group of people that probably they are not extremely environmental mindset, have environmental friendly, it is the general group, you probably wanted to focus on the pricing effect, is how can you help them to save it. But if your product is target market is on the people that who already consume sustainable food product, they do understand that a good environmental product come as a price, then you shouldn't be really focusing on saving price, but you want to focus on using price as a signal of the product quality. And I would say it's the same product can be framed in different ways, depends on what is your target market group on the market.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Let's get to a few more questions here. So we've got the next one. This is interesting. Is there sustainability in lab grown or cultured meat? Is the jury still out on its viability to begin with?
Yeah, that is a great question. That is something else that's grown a lot in the past few years. The jury is still out on that, the lab grown meat. It just hasn't reached the scale yet where I think we've been able to have the accurate studies. I can't speak into it too in depth. So I guess I'll leave it there before I quote something that's inaccurate.
Yeah, I think that would be more on the production side of it. I don't know all the details myself, but I would think it would have to be at least somewhat more sustainable. And
there's a very interesting consumer acceptance piece there. Some people are not willing to eat something grown in a petri dish. Say that's not me. Where others are very open to it. And so again, as
a scientist, I'm all for it.
Right, but there's this attribute called food neophobia, or this idea of fear of trying new foods, and for some people it's a huge barrier. And so,
Sure.
Insect protein, same thing. There's a lot of really fascinating protein production methods, but again, it goes back to this idea of it's not familiar. People are taking a risk. They're not sure about the safety. Am I going to compromise quality or taste? And so a lot of people are unwilling to take that risk until there's been a bigger movement.
Yeah, good point. Okay, let's go to a couple. Here's a very quick one. It's just a curiosity question. Where is Kernza being grown?
Mostly Kansas and Minnesota.
Okay.
Yep.
So let's go to the next one. I think this is interesting to think about. Did you find any differences with age groups in your surveys? Like, are there younger respondents more favorable towards sustainable products than older people?
Savannah, do you want to take this one?
Our age group was between 18 to 26, so we targeted young populations. So our study did not target older populations. So as of right now, we don't know yet how these messages is going to affect other populations, but I would say the future study could use similar method to see if it's well received by the older populations.
Yeah, and so they're generally speaking, younger people, younger populations are more open to sustainable eating, which is why we targeted a younger group here, just 18 to 26-year-olds.
So that's sort of been documented in
you'll find there's a lot of evidence that generally speaking that younger people are more interested in sustainable eating.
So here's another one. So what about the length of the messaging? I know you had one that was like a short response versus a long response. Like, I don't know if you had anything in between, but like, are shorter messages more effective than longer messages? Or, if you have longer messages, maybe in a study you can get them to read it, but maybe not normally. I don't know.
For that aquaponic fish study, the main reason for comparing the short versus the long one is really that the product itself is very unknown to a lot of the consumers. I think that will go down into what will be your product is familiarity among the target market group. And the current one on the Kernza we're testing is on the short. We're really focusing on, we even create the product, and then we have the marketing slogan, which is only one sentence. And then the back of the box will be a little bit more detailed information. And then we are testing on their recall rate. If you recall of the information, what is really stand out, that will be giving us the more information on, is it really that short slogans is stand out more on the benefit, or actually they do spend the time to look at the back of the box and learn a little bit more on Kernza. I think the shorter versus a longer version of the messages, it again really depends on the familiarity. For new product, you probably will want to go with the longer version so that you can lay out more of the benefit. And consumers do spend time because new product to them involve a lot of uncertainty. particularly for a food product, you're eating some and it digests in your body, and then they will spend more time to read the information, so the longer one will work better. But if the product is already on the market, like Kershaw, you're just slightly better in terms of sustainability. They do know about the whole grain wheat, and then this one is really going in a slightly different method, but the taste is the same. Then probably the shorter one will has as effective as the longer one.
That's really interesting. Yeah, so like sort of the short and the long are both kind of important depending on a lot of different factors. Yeah, that's cool. Okay, let's see. We got a few more questions, trying to catch up here. A slew of them came in. So let's see. How prevalent do you think aquaponics will get in the future? Will there be issues in it becoming too commercialized?
So the economic viability of aquaponics is still being looked into. There have been a lot of aquaponic companies that have come and gone. And so we were proposing another study to look into more the economic viability of aquaponics. So I'm not sure if the person that asked the question would like to clarify about being too commercial. So I think there's potential for it. With being the larger scale also increases efficiency. We're talking about how much food can we produce with the same number of with fewer resources and less waste. Having that scale helps a lot with that, and having that reach. So there is a aquaponics facility that is I just listened to this. I think it's somewhere in Ohio. They're building, oh no, it's not aquaponics. So I'm thinking of something else, but there's an aquaculture facility going up. They're exploring aquaponics kind of on the side, but it's more looking at producing bounty salmon. Anyway, that was an aside to make sure I'm trying to stay truthful here.
But I think that's a good point, is that sometimes larger actually could be more sustainable depending on the situation.
Absolutely, and there's a big argument about, is local more sustainable or not? There's this idea that there's lower environmental, the food miles things have to travel, and people think, oh, local is more sustainable. Well, at the local level, usually smaller producers, you lose this efficiency of scale. And so from what I understand of my reading of the literature is that local is not necessarily across all categories going to be more environmentally sustainable.
Yeah, that's a good distinction though, environmentally sustainable, right? Because then you've got the equity, right, which larger wouldn't be as good for equity, and you get all those different pieces of sustainability.
There's the three pillars that I mentioned: the people, planet, and profit. And you have to have all three to be sustainable. Traditionally business owners think about the bottom line, as in am I making a profit or not? But there was a document I think signed by 200 CEOs of large companies talking about the triple bottom line, which is people, planet, and profit, to really have a sustainable food production system. And you have different philosophies and life experiences that may cause you to think one way or the other. But I do think there are a lot of people trying to use the resources they have at large companies to do what they believe is the right thing when it comes to the people and the planet, and not just the profitability.
I would think that the problem, the literature at least we read about the aquaponics, one of the biggest issue is not commercialized enough. A lot of the producer because there's a large lump sum of money that you have to invest in to completely change your system into aquaponics, and going back to the profit, because I'm from marketing. So a lot of producers really, the first thing they will go back is that what my investment is going to pay back, and then whether there will be more of the people buying my product, then is going back is to the consumer acceptance. Only when the consumer know more about the aquaponics and their acceptance, they're willing to pay more, then the commercialize will happen. And I think it's a cycle, is a loop, and then profit always coming from the majority of the consumer, whether their acceptance levels. And I think the current problem right now is that they are not commercialized enough, is because there's still a large body of the consumer, they are not aware of the benefit of aquaponics.
I will briefly mention that aquaponics is a higher risk activity because you have multiple species that have different growth requirements, and so one thing goes wrong, it could, you have more things that are at risk should something go on, like there's a power outage and then everything dies,
Good point. Okay, so we're just about out of time, but I'm gonna do this last question, and I'll kind of put my own spin on their question. Sorry, but I think the basic idea is there some skepticism about certain labels in like the term natural. What does that mean? And is this label that I see in the store actually telling me anything, or is it greenwashing, right? And so that's the sort of the last question is what about greenwashing? What are the risks and how do you get around that?
So
That should.
go ahead.
You can go ahead.
I think you've done research in this area, or at least more informed the literature. I would say that the trust of the company matters, right? And if the company is perceived as having the consumer's best interest in mind, then the message is going to be more effective. So you need this congruency. So if a company is slapping something sustainable on their label, and then there's a news report about I don't know, dumping toxic sludge into a river, then obviously there's going to be a huge trust issue there. And so it's really, what does the brand represent to the person, and is it believable? And in some of our studies, we've asked the credibility of the claim as well, because it does matter. There is a lot of skepticism, and sometimes to some people it doesn't matter what you put on the label. They don't believe it unless it's there's some evidence to back it up.
Yes, I think one of the major factors for marketers or for companies really focusing on is that you don't really over-promising what you're delivering. A lot of the greenwashing is coming from really the perception is that the consumer doesn't even believe in your messages because the things that you mention about the benefit, you are really over-promising. That's why I go back to Jonathan's mentioned that our recent study that one of the important factors we're really studying at when we look at different message framing, one of the measurement that we're looking at is the message credibility. You can promise a lot of things, but it really depends on whether the consumer actually believe in it or not. That will go back to our implication is up to what level of your promise to the consumers that is believable, and they will not have the perception of you're lying to them. They don't trust in all those, and I think the correct level of the messaging, the message you give it to them is very important.
At the end of the day, environmental claims, they have to be believed, right? Consumers have to take the company's word for it. And so a lot of food attributes, there are some set of attributes where you can try for yourself. Taste, for example, you can make your own opinion about that. But at the end of the day, you have to take someone's word for it, if the company's word for it, if the claims are true or not.
Good point. Well, with that, thanks everyone. This was a great discussion. Next month on March 29th, we're going to have Farida Salim from physics speaking about creation of novel materials that could transform our lives. So that could be very interesting. And then in April, we'll have Julia Halo from biology speaking about what we can learn from genomics about human health and disease. So I just want to thank everyone for coming tonight, all our panelists and everybody that helped make Science Cafe possible. Take care, have a good one, and see you next month.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for coming.